In today's video, we have lots to discuss around the NHL, lots of news and rumors, including the latest on some key RFAs, as we're only a few days away from training camps getting open. We're going to be discussing Jeremy Swayman, Lucas Raymond, and Mo Sauder in Detroit, and any of those situations, if they're going to, possible to miss time, could it lead to a trade, or what could come about those situations. Plus, we have some other trade talk as well around teams like Columbus and Montreal and Edmonton. Plus, we have a signing in Columbus as well, some updates on PTOs, and big progress apparently made in Ottawa on a new arena. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of things to take a look at here. First, let's start with a couple of signings, and one of these signings are ones that I actually mentioned in the last couple of days I thought was going to take place. It seemed like a good fit. There really wasn't any rumors linking the two, but it's kind of come together here. JVR, James Van Riemsdyk, is signing in Columbus on a one-year deal at $900,000. Of course, as we've discussed in recent days, the Blue Jackets need a couple of forwards on top of trading Patrick Laine, the unforeseen circumstances that led to the accident in Johnny Gaudreau, and obviously Johnny's no longer with us, and then of course they have some injuries on top of that. They've had a lot of change in Columbus that they really couldn't have seen coming earlier, just a few weeks back. So that leaves the team short on forwards, like short on healthy forwards that can go into training camp. So we knew Don Waddell was pretty open and blunt about it in the last 24 to 48 hours, that he wants to add a couple of forwards. They did indicate they were going to look at the free agent market, see who was remaining out there. Otherwise, they'd have to look to the trade markets. But JVR, by far the most prominent forward that's out there on the market that was still looking for a contract, had some options for PTOs, but was kind of taking his time and trying to decide. Obviously, would have had to make a decision here soon enough with camps getting ready to open later this week. But Columbus comes calling with a one-year deal, $900K. So he takes that contract. There's no trade protection in the contract either. So I would assume that he could be a prime candidate to be moved later in the season to get onto a contending team for the playoffs. So we will see how things work out. But JVR going to Columbus for sure, and they're not done adding. They do want to add at least one more forward. They have all kinds of cap space. Also, as we talked about yesterday, they're still navigating the cap situation with the league and PA, trying to sort things out. Don Waddell said he wasn't worried about getting to the salary cap floor, but it could be something that they have to address here. So we could see a more significant addition, at least in terms of contract. So I had talked about in recent times here that they would be a prime trade candidate with Montreal, and I still think, based on what I've seen and heard, that I still think there's some speculation going on that they are having some discussions. It was around a couple of forwards in Montreal. I know I mentioned Josh Anderson as a prime candidate, but Josh Anderson has multiple years on his contract, and he does have a few teams he can block with his trade protection, and we don't know if he wants to go back to Columbus, because obviously he did play there before. It's been a while now that he's been in Montreal, but hard to say how that would work out. It's more likely that it would be a player on a one-year deal on the final year of his contract. So, like Christian Dvorak to me makes the most sense. UL Armia is another possibility, but I can see Dvorak being a player that Columbus would be more willing to take a chance on. Obviously, he's still young enough that he could find a way there to fit in on a longer term basis. I mean, with Armia, it's hard to say if they saw a fit. I mean, considering the team's rebuilding and they have a lot of, top young talent, Armia being a little bit older, would that really make sense? I mean, maybe for just for the season, but not for the future. Whereas Dvorak, as I said, he's, young enough still that he could fit with that group, at least better than Armia could. So we'll see. I do no guarantee that Columbus makes a trade with Montreal, but there's been a lot of talk that Montreal's been trying to unload a forward, and Columbus obviously needs one, so you connect the dots and put it all together, just like we did with JVR being by far the top forward on the market there. There are some other names out there that they could consider. I'm not sure if Mike Hoffman's going to continue playing, but he is an unrestricted free agent. There hasn't been much buzz around him, so I don't even know how much effort's being put into getting him a contract or trying. We know Phil Kessel wants to play, but will he get a shot in Columbus? Would he go there? I'm not sure. If he could get a guaranteed contract like JVR, I would think he probably would, but that's just my gut feeling on that. I know he's not far off from hitting like 1,000 points and some key milestones, and obviously a player who just really still loves the game. And I honestly think Phil would probably have to go to one of the rebuilding or weaker teams, because I don't know that he's going to get a roster spot in some of the contending teams. I really don't know that he could. But especially after being out of the game a whole year last year, that's going to take its toll on him. So we'll see. Columbus is definitely going to add somebody, whether it be they look at some of the free agents, which is not much left now, or look to the trade market. And like I said, I think if they do, Montreal's a prime candidate there. Victor Soderstrom, the former first-round pick taken by the Arizona Coyotes, who's never really, amounted to much yet being a regular NHL player. At this point has reached a complete stalemate, as we discussed with Utah, of course, formerly the Coyotes, on a new contract. So he wasn't going to be likely signing. We knew that. They tried to trade him. There was no real options. Nobody really wanted to take the contract or take the player on to get him signed. So he's now heading over to Europe. Victor Soderstrom has signed a 2-year deal in Sweden. So clearly a pick that did not work out for the former Coyotes franchise. Kevin Labanc is also one of those names that are still out there looking for a contract in the NHL. He is rumored to be getting a PTO from the New Jersey Devils. I'm not sure if the Devils have made that official, but we've seen it from enough confirmed sources that it appears to be a done deal, that he'll be going to camp. And as camps get ready to open here this week on Wednesday, I would suspect that there's probably going to be a few PTOs that we may not have heard, may not have been officially announced, but when you see training camp rosters released here over the next couple of days, there's bound to be a few minor surprises here and there that will certainly get some attention, I'm sure. Some news out of Edmonton. I know we've been wondering a lot about what's going on with Evander Kane. Of course, he played through much of last year with an injury, with a sports hernia type injury. It really got worse as the year went on, and when it got to the playoffs, it got to the point that he couldn't even really hack playing anymore. It does appear, according to the latest reports, that he is going to be having surgery in the next week to 10 days. So obviously that means he will not be in training camp. We had already heard and reported in the last day or so that Evander Kane and Darnell Nurse were both going to be starting the training camp period on IR. With, of course, Nurse, it doesn't seem to be as long a term of an issue, but with Kane, we already knew that it would be. Elliotte Friedman had reported back earlier this offseason that Kane was, seriously contemplating surgery, and if he ended up having it, that he would be looking at a significant recovery. It's according to the latest details, it says that the full recovery period won't be 100% confirmed and known until after he has the surgery. A lot of times, doctors have to give an estimate, but they, until they get in there doing the surgery, sometimes it's hard to tell exactly how bad something is and exactly what they're dealing with on a longer term basis. So even though they can't give a definitive timeline until post-surgery, there was said reports from Friedman before saying it could be several months. Some said that maybe he could miss the whole season. Some were a little less, optimistic of that, saying it will be several months, but he should be able to be returning before the end of the regular season. We don't really know. We also, at that point, didn't know that he'd be having the surgery so late into the offseason. Basically, at this point, it won't even be offseason anymore. We're likely going to be looking at the early part of training camp. So at this rate, hard to say exactly the timeline for Kane, but it does appear for sure that he's going to be having surgery, and it will be out for a major chunk, if not even possibly the entire season. So obviously he'll go on long-term injury reserve if need be, and the Oilers can decide how to utilize that cap space once they have a better indication on his exact time frame. Now, as I mentioned, some significant progress was also been reported on the Ottawa Senators getting a downtown arena in LeBreton Flats. Now, of course, there's still lots of work to be done, so this is not something I want people to think is close to being a completely done deal. There's still lots of hurdles, but they're ready, or are almost ready to go to what we'd call the next step. But there's several steps involved before you're going to see shovels in the ground and they're building rebuilding underway. But we know that originally there was a deadline to get a lease in place of September of last year. Of course, that was set up long before the passing of Eugene Melnyk and before everything went to change in ownership and all that stuff, right? So obviously because of the sale and the ownership change, they had no problem getting an extension until September of this year, and that deadline's coming up this Friday. So right now, the Senators and the NCC are working closely together, trying to overcome, obviously, a lot of obstacles and things that they weren't in agreement on as they, work towards this Friday's deadline, because that's the deadline is coming up quickly this Friday. Now, it's also possible that if both sides are happy with the fact that they've made significant progress but are not quite at a point where they're ready to sign the lease, that they may also agree to do an extension. And there was belief back a few weeks back that there was, this was a pretty hard and fast deadline, but that was before there was a lot of progress made in the discussions and negotiations here. So clearly, if both sides are, feel like they're trending in the right direction and are going to get there, there's no point in completely bailing on the process if they're not quite all the way there. I think it would make a lot of sense that if we don't get an announcement that a lease is ready to be signed and going to be in agreement on both sides here by the end of the week, that an extension could be made. But some of the progress and issues that they were having, obviously, was the size of the land parcel, which the Senators were concerned wasn't going to have enough parking. And they also wanted to make sure there was going to be ample developments around the arena. They're kind of using Edmonton as a template for how they did their ice district. So, they were a little bit worried about the size of the land. So that appears to be something that progress has been made on as well. Definitely been some give and take on the environmental requirements as well. I know the Sens had some serious concerns that what the requirements were going to be was really going to drive up the cost that much more. And of course, Michael Landauer's made it clear that he's certainly willing to pay what he considers his fair share, but he would be looking for assistance from all three levels of government, considering Ottawa is the capital of Canada, houses the federal government. Of course, you got local and provincial government as well. So they will be looking for variant degrees of funding from all three levels of government. We don't have an exact total or anything like that, but certainly would be something that would be required to make it work. I mean, it's going to be a hefty project, likely, I would guess, $1 billion or more. But obviously, like I said, there's other hurdles to be overcome as well. I do believe they're going to have to get consent from the Algonquin Nation, if I'm not mistaken, but I know the NCC, I believe, has a good working relationship with them because of the land there. So I don't know the full details and every little step that's going to have to be overcome, but we do know that there's lots of work left to be done. But this is a significant piece to move in the right direction towards a lease between the NCC and the Ottawa Senators to move forward with the downtown arena. So we may get an announcement by the end of the week, or at the very least an extension with a lot of optimism that they're trending in the right direction, and we'll hopefully get there very, very soon. Now, also, when some key RFAs remain unsigned just days before camp starts to open, and there's lots around the league, but the most prominent ones are Jeremy Swayman in Boston and Lucas Raymond, and of course Muriel in Detroit. I know I saw one article today, and it was just a fans based, the author's opinion, I guess, so wondering if the Swayman standoff could end up leading to a trade. And I would seriously hope, for Boston's sake, that that's not the case. Of course, you never know in these scenarios when, these negotiations don't go well and you have a stalemate. You have to wonder that at that point anything is possible, because not all issues can be overcome, right? Most of these RFA deals do eventually get worked out. It's not completely unusual for a few to miss a little bit of training camp, sometimes all of training camp, and sometimes even the first part of the season. Sometimes when you have situations when there's no arbitration and different things, it can be difficult to come to and agree on a new deal. It's just the way it is. But there is quite a few names still remaining unsigned. These are the most prominent ones out there, of course, but there certainly are a few others. I know Cole Perfetti in Winnipeg certainly comes to mind here as well. But when it comes to Swayman, the article I came across had suggested a deal between Boston and Colorado, whereas the Avalanche would trade, I think they suggested goaltender Alexander Georgiev, and defenseman Samuel Girard. I think, no offense to either of those players, but I think if the Bruins ever traded Swayman, it would certainly take more than that. He's still fairly young and one of the top goaltenders in the game, and that's a good starting point, sure. You could have a goalie come back, but after trading Linus Ullmark to the Senators, and what Elliotte Friedman talked about earlier, because a lot of people have kind of been critical of Boston, saying, why did they trade Ullmark without having a deal in place for Swayman? And it's kind of a simple process if you think about it. Linus Ullmark, I think they were worried with him because he did have some trade protection, a modified no trade, and the number of teams that he had blocked, which I believe was 14, did not include the Ottawa Senators. Now, at this point, I think he's warmed up to being an Ottawa Senator, and I still think there's a decent chance he signs an extension and stays. Until that's done, though, it's not done. But he does, seem pretty settled in, so to speak, this young part of his career with them. So with the problem now is that on July 1st, his number of teams that he would be able to block, or his list, I should say, would be changing. He would have the ability to change who was going to be there. And I think they were worried that, because Ottawa wasn't the only team they were talking to. I think they were concerned that what if he updates his list and some of these teams that we're getting close to doing a deal with are suddenly blocked, and now we need his blessing, and what if he won't do it? So I think they felt pressured because of the contractual situation that he had with a list of teams that he could block, and with an update coming just in a few days' time. So I really think that's why they felt obligated to get it done ahead of time. Of course, that trade went down on the night of Game 7 of the Stanley Cup playoffs, which was quite surprising. Nobody's kind of seen that coming. We knew that they had been talking. There was lots of rumors and reports, but yeah, that's why the Bruins felt pressured there. And it was more about Ullmark's clause in his contract than it was about Swayman. But would, on an ideal world, would it have been optimal to get Swayman signed first? Absolutely. But knowing how this negotiation's gone, it's hard to imagine that they would have come out so quick with such a high offer. I mean, Swayman reportedly is working the Bruins looking for the Charlie McAvoy contract, which is around $9.5 million. Now, of course, he could come down. I don't know where they're at on their side, on the Bruins side, but the latest reports are there's still a significant gap. And I've seen numerous articles out saying the Bruins are prepared to go into camp with Jonas Korpisalo being their number one goaltender. And to be honest, for them, I think that should be a very scary thought. No offense to Korpisalo, but he was one of the worst goalies in the NHL last year. I know overall the Bruins are a bit stronger team than Ottawa, so he could probably get a little bit better numbers just because he's behind a stronger team. But I don't know. He's never really been an elite level goaltender. So Swayman by far is the better option. They need to get him signed, but there's still a major gap, and it sounds like Swayman, who went through arbitration before, is not giving up. He's still very much in a standoff with the Bruins. So we'll see if anything changes here in the next couple of days. Could it lead to a trade? I would think not. I know there's bound to be some articles out there talking about it, but I really can't see that happening. In Detroit, when it comes to Raymond and Seider, again, one piece of information that I came across today that I hadn't seen before was that Steve Yzerman, according to the Detroit Free Press, has put what he call like a ceiling on the contract for both those young players, not wanting to go above captain Dylan Larkin at $8.7 million, which really you would think wouldn't be an issue. But it sounds like a lot like there was reports from Friedman saying that Lucas Raymond wanted at least the same as Tim Stützle and that he wasn't going there. So I don't know how big of the gap that remains between those two guys. But a lot of people had said earlier in the offseason that Seider was going to get like $1 million a year more than Raymond, given the fact that he's a top defenseman and plays such big minutes in all situations. Well, like I said, if that's the case, if you're looking at $17-18 million in cap space then if both these players get anywhere near what they want. If Detroit starts the season with both these guys not in the lineup, that is going to be a major blow. And for them to miss training camp, if they don't get signed here in the next 48 hours or so, it's going to be bad. I mean, at the end of the day, like looking at the Detroit team, I have concerns over their roster and the ability for them to take a step forward this year. And if they do get to the point that they miss the start of the year, and even if it's only a handful of games, that's a big blow, especially Seider on that blue line. after Mo Seider is a major drop-off, in my opinion. So, yeah, hopefully for their sake they get it figured out, because time is running out. And looking at a Habs article from Sportsnet and Eric Engels, one actually that we've referenced here before because it was written back probably about a week or more ago. Eric Engels does indicate that he fully believes this will be the last year of David Savard in Montreal. Looking at the top young right D, like Logan Mailloux and David Reinbacher coming up between this year and next year. I don't know that Reinbacher is going to be a full-time NHLer this year. I don't know that Mailloux will be either, but I do think Mailloux will push for playing time more than Reinbacher this year. At least that's what I think, based on what I've seen a little bit so far. We'll see, obviously. He's a little bit older and has a little bit more time that he's been developing here, so we'll see how everything plays out. But with those two right shot defensemen both looking very promising down the stretch here, it does seem likely that Savard very well could be moved. I mean, as Engels indicated in his article, he will be a top priority and a high-ranking player a lot of teams are going to have on their list as a top target. I know one of the teams that we've talked about before is, yesterday, they're looking for a top 4 right-shot defenseman who is more defensive-minded. The Oilers come screaming to me as a prime candidate in a prime landing spot for Savard. Now, Engels mentioned in a perfect world that if it was up to Savard alone, he probably would extend to Montreal and finish out his career there. But he also would have to understand with, all these young defensemen kind of pushing for playing time that it's, probably not very likely that he get to extend and stay out his time there further. But certainly it's, it was a childhood team playing in his home province. Hard to say how, what he's going to feel like moving on if he has to. But certainly I don't know for sure where he's going to end up. But if he is moved, there will be lots of interest. And I honestly think Edmonton is a prime landing spot for him, but we'll see where things go. It's going to be a long year. I don't think they're going to be in any rush to move him. I think it'll be something closer to the trade deadline. But let me know what you think on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.